So I wanted to talk about an article that just happened to pop up on my Google notifications. It was a Forbes article. Want to put extra emphasis on the fact that I wasn't searching for this article. I'm also not subscribed to Forbes, but because the title was thought-provoking, I said, okay, well, let me click on this and see what it's talking about. I'll also drop the link to that article in the comment section below, just in case any one of you care. So when I read this article, something about the framing felt off. Not necessarily that it was false, but framed in a way that left a very specific impression. And I believe it was intentional. So in this video, I want to break down a few things. First, what are pure sales? What does that actually mean? Why does that matter? Second, how Billboard counts streaming. I also want to talk about why artists drop on Fridays. I want to talk about how trunk sales like J. Cole's are counted, if they are counted at all. And also whether highlighting digital sales in 2026 actually tells a full story. So in this specific article, they made a statement about how this artist only sold 1,500 digital sales. They were specifically talking about iTunes downloads. And even reading that, I was feeling a sense of nostalgia, but also like, who the hell cares about iTunes? Nobody has iPods anymore. Do they even make iPods? You know, stuff like that was popping up in my mind. And so that is what inspired me to want to really dive into what the difference is between all of these things and their impact in each category. So like pure sales are referring to digital album purchases like the iTunes, physical CDs, vinyls. A lot of artists are diving back into vinyls. That counts as a pure sale. Direct paid downloads counts as a pure sale. So when an artist creates their own website and you can buy a song from that counts as a direct paid download, right? Streaming does not count as a pure sale. So if someone was to stream the same song 10,000 times on Spotify, that doesn't equal a pure sale at all. Only direct purchases count. And so here's the important part. In my mind, in 2026, pure sales are the smallest slice of music consumption. Streaming just dominates. And this is what inspired me to talk about this. I want to discuss how streaming actually works. How is it counted? So Billboard doesn't rank albums on pure sales alone. They use album equivalent units, AEUs. So that includes pure album sales, track equivalent albums, T. So T would be the individual song downloads, and then C, which is SEA, streaming equivalent albums. So streaming is converted into units. Roughly 1,250 premium streams equals one album unit, while 3,750 ad-supported streams equals one album unit. But my question becomes, in a streaming era, does highlighting digital downloads without equal emphasis on streaming growth create a skewed perception? Because downloads are a niche now. Streaming is the dominant behavior of all consumers. So depending on which metric you spotlight, you can create a very different narrative. Especially when you're dealing with the public who 9 times out of 10, as a people, we're not going and looking into these numbers or this information that's being put in our faces, right? If we're even inclined to click on these articles at all. Likely you're going to skim through the shit. You're going to say, oh, really? Oh, that's cool. Okay, next, let's go on to this popping YouTube video that just popped up on my screen. You know, like everybody has things that they're interested in. That's why you have people like me that go and do the research. And that made me think about something interesting. J. Cole selling albums out of his trunk. You know how he recently sold physical copies of his album directly out of his trunk for $1. So when we're on the topic of pure sales, the question that came to my mind was, do those count as pure sales? Yes, but only if they're properly reported. Billboard doesn't count inventory, they count verified consumer transactions during the official tracking week. J. Cole can't buy 10,000 copies of his own CD, and that now counts as 10,000 sales, and then he goes and sells them for $1 each out of his trunk. That would not count, because if it did, you would have a lot of artists out here, those that we don't even know the names of, getting rich off of that and having so many Grammys and Billboard nominations. They just cannot have that. So when an artist sells CDs directly, even out of a trunk, those sales can possibly count as a pure album sale, but only if they're properly reported through Billboard's tracking system. Manufacturing inventory doesn't count. Only verified consumer purchases during the tracking week count. For instance, if J. Cole sells 1,000 copies of his CD on Thursday at 11:59 p.m., that's the last minute of that week. But if he in turn sells 1,000 copies on Friday night, midnight, that will count towards the new week. So that's why artists do direct to fan physical sales, because it boosts pure album numbers. It can strengthen your first week totals for sure, and it can help secure a #1 debut. Pure sales are weighted heavily compared to streaming in some album chart contexts. Let's talk about the streaming reality now. When we look at real-time streaming data, like Spotify daily streams, like Apple Music chart placement, YouTube view spikes, you often see that the streaming movement is significantly intense after events like a Grammy, right? And streaming is what sustains chart longevity. Pure sales might spike dramatically in percentage terms, right? But if that streaming is not equal or greater, you oftentimes see a decline, because streaming is usually what represents the real cultural lift. So the real takeaway here is this: before reacting to headlines about sales numbers when it comes to artists, we have to understand what those numbers actually represent. Pure sales are purchases, streaming equivalent units are the dominant metric. And in a digital era, which metric you highlight determines the narrative that's spread. So framing is imperative. Let me know what you think about this down below.